Welcome to another episode of Keeping It Realty with Marc and Brian. Today, our sponsor, of course, is East Brother Beer, located in lovely Point, Richmond. And we're going to be drinking one of their Bow Pills. I think it's the same one we had last week. So we're not trying anything new, but we love their beer and highly recommend everyone to check it out. Also want to give a shout out to Lanny Clark with Prime Lending. And he did tell us this morning that mortgage rates are in the low fours today. And this is going to tie into a little bit of what we're going to talk about later on in the show. Mortgage rates have come back down from the peak of 5.2, 5.3 in late of 2018. So they're now in the low fours, which is incredible to see. And so I think when we get into one of the topics, you'll see how that's kind of impacted the real estate market. So let's just jump right into it in our very first topic here, and it's automation in real estate. So recently, the Open Doors CEO came out and basically mentioned that the role of the real estate agent is going to change, and it's going to change by them becoming advisors as opposed to being your typical real estate agent that handles every aspect of a transaction, including showing properties.
And to kind of interject with that, what they were referring to is Open Door has this buy it now button, so to speak, which they took away for some time because most real estate agents see themselves as in the role of the negotiator or deal maker. They're trying to simplify the home buying process. And let's emphasize that it's the single family home buying process they're talking about.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest clarifications that we need to make is that there's two types of real estate agents. There's the agents that work on the single family home market, which is probably made up of about 80 to 90% of all real estate agents out there. And then there's the commercial agents that deal with commercial property. And commercial property doesn't necessarily have to be office commercial space or industrial, but it could also be multifamily buildings. Now, on the commercial side, Brian, you don't see much automation going on the commercial side, right?
No, not necessarily, especially because not every single commercial deal is exactly the same. There's a lot more analysis. And in fact, one of the things that Open Door and the automation of real estate agents is talked about is not only the buy it now button, but because of emerging technologies like lock boxes that can be programmed to open within a 1 to 2 hour period. And so it takes away the role of the real estate agent of having to show a property.
Well, I have to say that those electronic lock boxes work amazing. I use those on some of our rental listings, and it's awesome to have tenants be able to go at any time of day, look at the property. And the biggest concern for a lot of property owners is, well, how secure is it? Well, we do verify their information before they get a lockbox code. The lockbox code does change every 30 minutes and only allows one person to access the property at a time. And there's reminders, and the actual lockbox, it's amazing what these lockboxes do, but they will actually identify the weight of the key when you program to put the lockbox on the property. If the key is missing or it doesn't get put back, it sends notifications to my office and also to the person in case they may still have the key for whatever reason.
Yeah. And now put that into context of what we're talking about, which is automating real estate, taking away the job of the average real estate agent. Now, as I pointed out when we were looking at this whole article, in states like New York, real estate agents, I'm sorry to say this, are professional space showers. I've purchased properties in New York before. In fact, I've done a lot of different transactions all around the country. I was a Florida broker. I've done large transactions in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Maine, Las Vegas. And a lot of times real estate agents, especially in the single family home market, are nothing but professional space showers, especially with New York. If you go and you ask them after you've taken a look at a property and you love it and, oh, I want to make an offer, they literally say, okay, great, go call your attorney to write the offer. You ask them a question like, well, how much do I need for a down and closing? They're like, call your loan officer. Or if you're selling a property, well, how much am I going to net? They're like, talk to your CPA. They're almost literally there just to show the property. And so again, this is the role that they're talking about excluding. When you take places like California, where we're almost like attorneys, we really already have the role of being an advisor in many cases. And that's even more so the case with multifamily residential or commercial or office building sales. A lot of times when I'm selling an apartment complex, I'm not going out there showing it in the morning. I'm literally running the numbers first, looking at the ROI, the cap rates, and determining whether it even fits the financial needs of my client. And then I might even have them just take a drive-by on the outside on their own. We'll make offers subject to inspection. And then if we get it accepted, we'll do the walkthrough.
Yeah. Now, we all in the industry have to realize that automation is happening in every industry. Automation, new technology, it happens. The industries evolve. And so eventually you're going to have the role of the real estate agent that typically does single family homes evolve also. They're no longer going to be the gatekeepers for data and information. They will no longer be required to, actually see properties. And it wouldn't surprise me if one day that people will be automatically able to just generate their own offers online. And
well, that's what the whole buy it now button is supposed to do.
Yeah. But that will evolve to a much larger scale. But real estate agents are still going to be involved because they're the ones that handle all the day-to-day things that happen within a 30-day escrow transaction.
Yeah.
So next topic is the California Association of Realtors February Housing Report that just recently came out. And it looks like mortgage rates are low, which we're now talking about in the low fours. We saw them peak in close to the middle fives toward the end of 2018.
Right.
They did drop afterwards, and we've seen a bit of a bump in activity of buyers coming back into the market with the lower rates. But it's still a little bit funky time right now because we're still down 9% sales year over year from February 2019 to February 2018.
Well, like, for example, one of the articles that we were reviewing as part of this topic coined the phrase that it's a totally random market, referring to the price points. And that really is what we're seeing. There are some properties that still get multiple offers and other ones that just don't and may sit on the market for a while. It's not the big buying frenzy. And as we've talked about in prior videos, what we believe is that we are heading towards a small recession, probably that's going to last 18 to 24 months at the most. In my opinion, nothing really major. And it's just one of these things that seems to always repeat itself over these cyclical periods of 6 to 7 years, especially in California, where the market goes up and then it hits a plateau and then it comes down. It's still hard to peg exactly the reason why in this case. In prior markets, it was directly tied to the job market or other issues such as the banking crisis. But in this case, jobs are still relatively strong. The economy is still relatively moving quickly. Rates are still really low, even when they went up to or peaked at 5.125. I mean, I remember when they were 9.5 or 10, and we were happy when they dropped to 7.5. Now, granted, people have gotten really accustomed to much lower rates, and so it's all perception and that herd mentality when the rate bumps up and things slow down.
Well, I also think 2019 is going to be a very odd year with the randomness that we read in the article. And that's really what we're experiencing, that some properties that would have sold with multiple offers a year ago are now sitting on the market with maybe no offers and lucky to get 1 or 2 offers 30, 60 days down the road. But then there's some properties you list on the market that fly off and, sell within a couple of days. Well, and we're in that transition period, I think, where people, with what happened toward the end of 2018, rates going up, you have a lot of negative news with a lot of big companies preparing for a 2020 recession, doing layoffs. That creates some kind of uncertainty in the market with the news. And I think you saw a lot of people sit back and kind of wait around to see what would happen. Then you had a lot of sellers that decided, hey, now's the time to sell because look at all this bad negative news. And then I think now people are realizing, oh, now that rates are low again, let me jump back into the market. And you're starting to see even inventory drop a bit.
Well, these slower markets or these recessionary periods, I personally, as a real estate agent, love them because a lot of times when you're an agent in a really, really, a fast market, you might be writing multiple offers. It takes multiple offers just to get accepted. In this market, first offer I write, I'll probably get accepted. And in many cases, agents will be calling me back. Hey, you showed my apartment complex. Are you going to bring me an offer? In fact, a couple of the properties we reviewed, they sat on the market for a while. From the multifamily unit side, investors want a higher return, so they're buying at a 6 cap as opposed to a 5, right? And so I have experience because of the slowdown that a lot of my clients can get into a contract a lot easier. But then, for example, there was a property, a 4-unit building that we reviewed, I think it was last episode, and I was checking in with that agent. He had 9 offers within the first 2 days, and it was a good property. It didn't have rent control. It was in San Pablo, and it was a 4-unit building. So it's got this randomness, but it's a randomness and it's a slowness that I personally like, and I tend to do a lot more deals in this market.
If you're a buyer or buyer's agent, this is the ideal market to jump in. You'll be surprised how some sellers will put a price out there, an asking price. They get a lowball offer, and you'll have a certain percentage of buyers or sellers now that will take that lowball offer.
Yeah, they will respond and they will accept it. Yeah,
yeah, because again, it comes down to the unsurety. We still hear of a lot of experts, a lot of professionals talk about a 2020 recession coming up, and you're seeing a lot of these very big corporations doing layoffs and basically trimming the fat off expenses in order to prepare for the 2020 recession that many experts are predicting will happen. And so with that, I think you start seeing a lot of sellers, the mentality change to where they want to basically accept an offer and take whatever they can get now before the market gets worse. So for a buyer and buyer's agent, I think now's the ideal time to jump in. So next topic is preparing the property for the next downturn. So we were just talking about the mentality of some sellers. Now, how do you prepare your property for the next downturn as an investor? And one thing I like to tell people is when you buy an investment property, you can't, I see so many people make the mistake of treating it as if it's something in the stock market or some other type of investment where you can just kind of put it off to the side, not pay attention to it, and you're just going to make money coming from it. But the reality is, as a property owner and investor, you are involved, even if you have a professional management company, because the management company has to report back to you, get your approval on a wide range of different things. Now, you could automate it in a way by hiring an asset manager, which is a little bit different than a property manager, but then you should also understand how to properly run your own property and your own business, because that's how you can also judge the property manager and the asset manager to make sure they're doing a good job. So Brian, what are ways that people can prepare their investment property for the next downturn?
Well, we were just talking about this the other day about trimming the fat and looking at expenses, seeing where some expenses, for example, utilities might be higher than normal. In fact, where there was a property that I think you had just recently picked up where the prior property management company had garbage being taken out twice a week. So just that little change in having it done weekly as opposed to twice a week saved the owner how much?
$1,250. So
per month.
Per month, yeah. We took over this building and garbage was $2,500 a month for a 25-unit building. And so we did an experiment. What if we cut service from 2 times a week pickup to 1 time a week pickup? We had already these large giant bins there. I couldn't imagine so much trash that we had to have pickup twice a week. And guess what? We are okay on once a week pickup, and we save the owner $1,250 per month, which added up to quite a bit of money for the entire year, which, depending on when you're ready to sell, adds a lot of equity to your property.
Yeah. And again, just in speaking to things that you could do in preparation for the downturn, it really depends on your individual perspective. If you're a single family home buyer and it's your primary residence, my advice to the client is always only get into a mortgage payment that you can afford when the prices of homes begin to go down. Because at the same time that the prices of homes might be going down, if you don't have to sell your house, then guess what? It's going to be an unrealized loss. So it's really important if you're planning to sell your home say in the next 2 years or 3 years, then you might not get the highest price for the property. However, if you plan to stay there for 5 or more years, by the time you really get around to the point of potentially having to sell your home, you're probably going to be back in the next upcycle. So, or if you're an investor, a lot of times, something I always point out to all of the investors is that when you're looking at the cap rates, so long as that you're doing your increases of rent regularly, and that's annually, and you're taking them to whatever amount that you can take them to, whether it's 3% in a rent control area or as much as 10% in non-rent control areas, you're increasing your cap rate successively year after year, right? You've heard me speak about this before, where you start out at a 5.5 or a 6 cap when you buy a property, and you can predict based upon just regular rental increases, not big, swinging for the fences rental increases, that you're steadily bringing your cap rate from a 6 to a 7 to an 8 to a 9. Well, when the prices of properties go down in a downturn, your cash flow as an investor doesn't change. What you could sell your property for might drop a little bit, because new investors looking to buy your property might want to come in to a 6.5 cap because they perceive more risk in the market. But if you're having to sell, well, one, you're never going to be in a position where you have to sell if you've got a cash flow. But if you do decide you want to sell, you might make a lot less, but you can take that same equity or capital gain and roll it into something where you're going to start out making a lot more also, right? So if people are buying at a 6.5 cap and you're selling at a 6.5 cap, chances are you're going to be buying at a 6.5 cap too, because the market is also down. And so you'll be able to ride at a higher starting point as the rents begin to go up, and you go through the typical cycles of real estate.
And I think it's very important to finish off here and say that when the economy goes against your favor, and what typically happens with investment property is you may see your own income revenue drop, and that's where you have to focus on trimming excess expenses. Now, when the economy is great, what you also want to do is focus on upgrading your building. Take your building from a C class to B class, or whatever you can do to improve the desirability, because when tenants are looking for property, they're going to be looking for the nicer properties if they have the upper hand and the advantage. So when the economy is great and in your favor, do the upgrades, do what you need to do and should be doing to your building to bring it up, so that during a downturn, you still remain a desirable location for tenants. So the next topic we want to get into is our real estate origin story, and basically how Brian, you and I got into real estate. So Brian, I'll let you take it away. How did you get into real estate, and how and why did you keep this as your career?
Well, I wish I could say something really cool, like I was bit by a radioactive spider, but that unfortunately didn't happen. So I started my career back in 1991, right out of high school. Actually, I passed my real estate license test in January of 1991, and turned 18 in March, and literally out of my senior year of high school started selling houses. Now, I never intended to be in real estate. As a matter of fact, I wanted to study biology and become a scientist. So I actually used my real estate agent's license to pay for my way through college, got a degree in biology. And by the time I did, because I was working full-time in real estate and taking a full load, which wasn't, always easy to do, I was like 6 years in the business. So by this time, I had really gotten a lot of my ropes down, and it was a really bad economy to start in 1991. I won't get into all the reasons why, but it was a lot worse than what we previously experienced from 2008 to 2012 in what we call the Great Recession, when the banks were all closed. So during that period of time, I'm a college student, and I get into buying 4-unit buildings because I want to be able to live in a unit and have my renters pay for my expenses so I can continue to save money, go to college. So after finishing college and getting a biology degree and actually going to work for a pharmaceutical company doing recombinant DNA, I realized this is really boring. So I was so much better at real estate, and I developed a pretty large clientele of multifamily investors, including myself, and I had gotten a lot of the personal ropes down of 1031 exchanges, investor financing versus owner-occupied financing. So my mantra became, instead of just buying a house, let me sell you a 4-unit building first using FHA with 3.5% down, and then within 3 to 6 months later, let's buy that single family house so that you have the income from the 4 units paying half or all of your mortgage payment on your house, which is exactly what I did. And so that whole story kept carrying on where, let me sell you an apartment and a house, and then we'll sell you a second and a third and a fourth apartment. And so soon all my clients had 5, 6, 4-unit buildings, 5 or 6 4-unit buildings and their house, right? So my typical client, instead of buying one house every 4 to 5 years, would do 3 transactions a year the first time they met me. And then I would tell them, like, let's revisit your 4-unit buildings a year later, a year and a half later, resell them, 1030 and exchange them into like an 8-plex or larger. And so I just kept repeating this process and over and over again. Found myself sometime in 2000 with about 150 apartment units, this office building that I own now, and a couple of agents started working for me. In fact, many of my agents that first started to work for me were my past clients who had quit their jobs and then had cash flow from their apartments, and then became my first 10 real estate agents. In fact, some of those 10 real estate agents are still with me today. Literally like 20 years later, I've seen their kids grow up. And during that period of time when I had owned a bunch of apartment buildings and office buildings and was still selling real estate, I started picking up all these great ideas from this wonderful CPA that I still use today, that gave me the ability or the knowledge to write off different types of income that I generated from my real estate investments, from passive to capital gains to my real estate commissions. And this segued later into being a real estate developer, where I was able to condo convert several of my apartment buildings, which created a huge capital gain that later segued into being able to take ground up properties, go through the entitlement process of getting raw land approved for a highest and best use. And most of the time they were apartment units, right? Retail on the bottom, apartments at the top. And then during that time, I being really, really high net worth, I also experienced the big downturn of 2007 to 2012, where the mortgage crisis occurred. So again, I'm not going to get into a whole lot because that was like a whole story unto its own. But that got me into a whole lot of the various technical aspects of personal guarantees and things of this nature, which allowed me to go into consulting for high net worth individuals who were going through the same issues. And then, somewhere like around 2011, 2012, after having been able to recover from some pretty large losses, but again, because of the fact that I was pretty well bolstered with about 1,000 apartment units at the time, and office buildings and retail, and then I was still able to sell real estate, I was right there being able to deal make, and that took me all the way through here. So why do I still keep doing it? Because I really do enjoy it. It's exciting. There's never a dull moment, and the laws are ever changing. At some point I do want to retire, but I'm still relatively young, even after 29 years in the business. And so I figure I still have another 20 years on the tank. So anyways, with that, I'm going to hand it back off to you, Mark.
Okay, so catch us on next week's episode where I talk about my origin story.
I'm sorry, did I just take up your time?
Which, we'll talk about it next week.
Okay. Were you bit by a radioactive spider?
No, I wish I was.
Oh.
That would have been so much more fun. Imagine doing inspections by just climbing up the side of the building.
It would have been great, yeah.
Unless I was the guy from the movie Free Solo, that Alex
I saw that.
Yeah,
that was crazy.
That was a great movie. I mean, completely my palms, everything sweaty. I was nervous the entire time just watching it. I wasn't even there at El Capitan. But anyway, let's get into the property analysis.
Okay.
So what property are we analyzing today? I believe it's a fourplex in Richmond that just came on the market.
Yeah, well, actually, no. This property has been on the market for 98 days. So we don't want to just analyze great properties on this show. We want to analyze properties that are mediocre or not so great so that you can identify them and then even potentially look at different angles. Now, we've been talking about how we're kind of in a slower market right now. And this particular property has been on the market for 98 days. What I always like to do is do a little bit of research on the property owner. And so that's what I did. Turns out the property owner just bought this a year ago. In fact, a little over a year ago in January 11th of 2018 for $715,000. Now, back when they bought it for $715,000 a year ago, they didn't really necessarily get a great deal. They were buying it at like a 5.11 cap. And then now a year later, they're selling it for $749,000. Now, again, this is a 4-unit building in Richmond, all 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. And there's a couple of
now,
slides
why would
of the
someone
picture.
sell that quickly?
You know, I really don't know. They bought the property all cash, so there isn't any loan. You know, the only way to really find out is to kind of pump the agent for answers if they're able to get it.
After commission, they're gonna take a loss on the sale.
Yeah, in fact, if they sold it for $749,000 after commission, they literally only have a capital gain of about $9,438. That's if they sold it for $749,000. And part of this is I'm not necessarily recommending that you offer $749,000. This is one of those precarious situations where it's not the best property, but it's a property that they might want to make a deal on because they're either trying to exit for some type of distress. I can't imagine really why they would be under some type of distress because they don't owe anything. It looks like they bought it all cash. And of course, the question comes that you just asked, why would they be selling it after a whole year? And again, this is why I'm focusing on the property. So if you look at the property at $749,000 and you put a 25% down, you're looking at roughly needing about $206,000 out of pocket. And if you use today's prevailing interest rate, you're looking at a mortgage payment of about $2,947. Now that's before expenses. So let's take a look at the income. The current income, right, and this is a rent control area, is $1,500, $1,049, $1,049, and there's a vacant unit there, which I'm placing at a value of $2,000 per month for a 2-bedroom, 1 bath in that area.
Yeah, which is reasonable because it is pretty close to Richmond BART.
Yes.
And there's apartments right next to BART within 1 or 2 blocks that are getting $2,000 to $2,100 easy.
Yeah. So when you take those existing numbers, because you can't change the existing rents because of rent control, you can only go up a maximum of 3% a year. Then you get a gross income of $5,598. And so that's the income that I'm using. That annualizes to $67,000 a year. And then, of course, you take the vacancy factor, you take away the utilities, you take away the capital improvement reserve and repair reserves, and you take away the management fee, you take away the new property taxes based on the current ad valorem and the insurance, and you're running at roughly about 40% of your expenses. Now, at 40% of your expenses, you're only making a net of $241 a month at the current asking price, which is nothing to write home about. Again, it's a 5.11 cap. If this was all at market and all the 4 units were at $2,000 a month, it would literally be an 8.57 cap, if not for the fact that you can't get there. In fact, later I'll show you how it'll take, within the first 4 years, you're only going to be a little bit under 6%.
So one thing that I want to point out here is that it's very important when you buy a property, even if you're coming in all cash, to run these analysis, run these numbers, and make sure that when you're buying the property, you're not overpaying. Because let's say you do get into a situation where you do have to sell the property within a year for whatever hardship reason. Well, if you overpaid for it and you get stuck in wanting to at least break even on your purchase and what you bought the property for, it may not be possible, because when you go to resell it, the investors that are on the market buying most of the time will be running these numbers also. So it's very important that when you buy, you run these numbers and make sure you're not overpaying, just because you never know when you get into a hard spot.
Yeah. In fact, let's emphasize again, make sure you properly run the numbers we're talking about. And if your agent doesn't know how to do so, reach out to us. We'll analyze it for you on the show.
One thing too, we also partner up with agents on sales, or we even do consulting. So we have different ways of working with different agents and helping your agent if you need help.
So again, why I brought up this particular property is because, there's a little bit more to it. It's been on the market for a while. The owner's selling after just a year of owning it. They didn't buy it at the best price, but they might be in a position where they would be willing to bargain. And so if you ran the numbers again, even at what they bought it for $34,000 less than they're asking, and dropped back down to $715,000, and you rerun the same numbers with a 25% down, underwrite at what comes out to about 39.19%. You start out at a 5.43 cap, $420 a month. Again, still nothing to write home about. You're still not potential where you can get to a 9 cap if you were all at market rents, but it'll probably take you about 6 years to get there. And again, what that tells me is that even at 715, there might be a little bit of room depending upon what their actual reason for selling might be, which you're only going to be able to find out if you initiate a conversation or an offer, right? I always like to liken it to like going to being single and going out on a date or being at a bar. If you don't go over there and say hello, somebody else will. So
now also one thing to point out is if they sell it and take a capital loss, they could also use that capital loss to offset other capital gains.
It could, yeah, correct. But again, that's on the side of the seller. So,
Correct.
if you're advising the seller and you have different reason, and you know that what their overall big picture is, whether they got capital gains from stocks that they've made, or other types of income from, say, flipping a house that was just for the purpose of making a gain, not necessarily the cash flow, then there's different ways that they could potentially offset this. Again, I can't tell you why until we really dig deeper, but it's one of those properties where here's something that looks a little interesting. There's some potential there, and it might be an opportunity for a deal. At 715, you're coming in a little bit better. And if you look at it on the overall 4-year picture, right? I analyzed them at, if you bought it at $715,000 over 4 years, you'd start out at a 5.43 cap, go to a 5.68 cap, then a 5.94 cap by the 3rd year, so just a little bit under 6, and then by the 4th year, you're at a 6.21 cap. Now, that all said, 4 years later, the market rents will have probably also gone up. So your loss to lease, or the difference of what you're actually getting, which is still a decent return, and what the market will bear, will probably be a larger disparity. If you analyze the same property over the asking price of $749,000 over a 4-year period, then by the 4th year, you're only getting to a 5.86 cap rate, which is still under the market cap that you could be buying at right now, and what a lot of clients are getting into right now as the market is slowing down, and even multifamily owners are willing to take offers less than the asking price.
Yeah, and now buying in rent control cities, I mean, it's very unique in that you can't really get up to those market rents, but there are some people that are willing to invest in rent control cities because of the chance that they might get a vacancy. So, for example, I mean, how would the numbers look if one of the tenants just left and you were able to take that up to market?
Well, if one of the tenants left, and keep in mind, we started out with this has 3 occupied units, a 1 vacant unit, which if we brought up to the immediate market value of $2,000, is what I ran these numbers on. Well, that extra bump in income, if one of the tenants moved out, would instantly bring you above a 6 cap within the 1st year. Again, the whole reason why I brought this up is just to kind of point out different things that as an investor you should look for. Like, always ask your agent to run a history on the property. You could pull this up pretty much immediately. It's always at your fingertips as to what the owner bought it for. I will always look and see what their current mortgage is, and then do a reverse calculation as to what its current balance is today. And then from there, I can kind of analyze and figure out, well, what is the owner going to net? And then begin to piece together what their reason for selling might be.
Now, out of the 4 units, one of them is vacant, right?
Yeah, one is vacant.
So this would actually be a very good opportunity for someone to, instead of buying a single family house for themselves, they could actually buy this fourplex, move in,
yes,
and live in the vacant unit themselves.
They could go in and use FHA and get in here with 3.5% down. In fact, if they were going to do that, rather than reduce the price, they probably would. It'd be well served if they asked the owner to pay up to 3% of the purchase price for their closing cost. Now, that all said, if they lived in one of the units, they wouldn't necessarily have a cash flow. What they'd have is a very, very reduced cost of living. But as tenants begin to move out, and again, this is one of the things I was going to mention, is when you make an offer on this, in your due diligence period, you're always going to look at the rental agreements and look at the propensity for those tenants to move out to kind of gauge your opportunity of being able to put market rent in. This is something that you must always do whenever you're looking at properties in rent control areas, is do a lease analysis.
And this is why it's very important to work with both property managers and commercial agents that understand multifamily income properties so that you can get an idea of what you're really buying. So with that said, Brian, is this a buy or is it a pass?
It's a closer look, and it's a make an aggressive offer and see where it goes.
Okay, we're gonna have to have 3 categories.
Yeah, it's not. It's not one I would just go, oh, this is a must buy. It's one of these ones where I smell a little bit of blood in the water. Maybe we can make a deal.
And it depends on what your goal is.
Right.
Like, are you gonna move into it, or do you want to risk a long term to
Correct.
where you might get a vacancy?
Yeah, there's a couple of different angles to this property.
Perfect. So thank you for watching another episode of Keeping It Realty. Make sure to catch our prior episodes. We are posting these videos on LinkedIn. We're posting on Instagram TV. The audio version goes up on iHeartRadio, Spotify, iTunes. Literally, you can find us anywhere.
Oh, I didn't know we have an audio version.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
So catch us on next week's episode where I will get into my origin story. And
so no radioactive spiders?
No.
Okay, just checking again.
And then thank you again to our sponsors, Lanny Clark with Prime Lending and East Brother Beer Company.